If you're brave enough to walk into the truth, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't a ghost story, it's something far worse. It started on an ordinary Sunday evening in the small Pennsylvania town of Hollow Creek, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and neighbors waved from their porches. But that night, the peace shattered in a way no one could explain. At 7:43 p.m., a neighbor named Walter Crane called 911. His voice shook as he told the operator, "Something's wrong at the Roberts place. Their lights have been on all night, and no one's answering the door." When police arrived, they found the Roberts' two-story colonial house standing silent, its dining room visible through the large bay window. The table was set for 4. Dinner plates filled with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans sat untouched, steam long gone cold. A half-drunk glass of wine still clung with condensation. The TV hummed softly in the next room, showing a rerun of Wheel of Fortune. But the family, John, Evelyn, and their 2 teenage kids, Mason and Leela, were nowhere to be found. The front door was locked from the inside. The back door, too. No signs of a break-in. No footprints outside, no overturned chairs, no spilled drinks. Just a meal frozen in time. Detective Laura Finch, a veteran of the Hollow County Sheriff's Department, stood in the center of that dining room, her flashlight beam moving across the walls. Something about the scene gnawed at her instincts. Everything looked staged, too perfect. She leaned closer to the table. 4 plates, all served, but only 3 forks had been used. She made a note. "Where's the 4th?" she murmured. The crime scene team photographed everything. They dusted for prints, took samples from the food, and bagged up a napkin with what looked like lipstick smudge, not Evelyn's shade, according to her makeup drawer upstairs. By midnight, the Roberts case was already a local sensation. Reporters showed up the next morning, cameras flashing outside the quiet cul-de-sac. "Family vanishes during dinner," read the headlines. The community was terrified, not because of what they saw, but because of what they didn't. Over the next 2 days, the investigation deepened. There were no ransom notes, no credit card activity, and no known enemies. John Roberts was a real estate agent, well-liked, no debts. Evelyn taught music at the local elementary school. Mason was a varsity baseball player. Leela, an honor roll student. No signs of trouble. Detective Finch and her partner, Detective Greg Torres, started reconstructing the final moments based on phone and digital data. At 6:59 p.m., Evelyn texted her sister, "Dinner is almost ready. John is in one of his moods again." At 6:59 p.m., the Roberts' home security camera, a simple doorbell cam, recorded John stepping outside to take a phone call. He looked tense, pacing near the porch railing. The call lasted exactly 2 minutes and 11 seconds. The number was a disposable prepaid phone. After that, nothing. The feed went dead at 7:03 p.m. The security technician later confirmed it wasn't a power cut. Someone had manually disabled the system from inside. Finch studied the footage again and again, zooming in on the reflection in the glass door. Behind John, faintly visible, was a shape, maybe a person, standing in the dining room doorway. She paused the footage. "Greg," she said quietly. He wasn't alone. The next lead came from the Roberts' next-door neighbor, an elderly widow named Martha Doran. She told detectives she saw someone leaving the house that night around 8:30 p.m. "It was dark, but I remember the sound. A car door slamming, heavy steps, and someone humming." "Humming?" Finch asked. "Yes," the woman nodded. "A hymn, I think. The same one they used to sing at that old chapel down on Green Hollow Road, the place that closed years ago." Finch's brow furrowed. "The chapel's abandoned." "Maybe," said Martha, "but sometimes I still see lights there." The chapel, St. Jude's, had been shut down in 2007 after a fire gutted part of its interior. It had a dark reputation. Whispers about cult meetings, private healing ceremonies, and unregistered visitors coming in at night. When Finch and Torres arrived, they found the front door chained shut, but one of the back windows had been pried open recently. Inside, the smell of mildew and burnt wood filled the air. Their flashlights swept over pews covered in dust, old hymnals, and melted candle wax. Near the altar, Finch's light caught something on the floor: fresh mud, footprints, 2 sets, adult size. Then she saw it. A folded note on the altar, weighed down by a rusted silver cross. It read, in sharp handwriting, "They wanted to be saved. Don't come looking." The note was sent for analysis. No prints, no identifiable ink, just that chilling message. By the 4th day, the case had reached national coverage. TV anchors replayed the doorbell footage on loop, and conspiracy forums exploded with theories: cult abduction, government cover-up, even alien involvement. But Finch didn't believe in theories. She believed in evidence. So she went back to the Roberts house, alone. It was nearly midnight when she arrived. Rain drummed against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. She moved through the house slowly, flashlight in hand, stopping at the dining table. 4 plates, 3 used forks. She opened the fridge. Inside were restovers from that dinner, untouched. On the shelf above the food sat something odd: a small flash drive wrapped in masking tape. Her heart pounded as she pocketed it and hurried to the car. Back at the station, she plugged it in. The screen flickered to life. A single video file, time-stamped 3 hours before the family disappeared. The footage showed the Roberts' dining room. Evelyn was setting the table, John pacing in the background, agitated. He kept glancing toward the door, muttering something Finch couldn't hear. Then faintly, from outside the camera's frame, a voice, male, calm, deliberate, said, "John, it's time." John froze. Evelyn turned toward the sound, confused. The camera shook slightly as someone picked it up. Then, static. The screen went black. Finch sat frozen at her desk. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. She replayed the clip again, this time slowing it down, adjusting the audio levels. In the background, just before the static, she caught something faint. A sound. A low hum. The same hymn Mrs. Doran had described. It wasn't just someone humming it. It was many voices. And faintly underneath it all, a metallic scrape, like chairs being pulled back from the floor. She leaned closer to the screen, staring at the final frame of static. There for less than a second, something glowed faintly in the distortion. Letters. Warped but legible. "St. Jude welcomes the faithful home." Her blood ran cold. Finch stood up abruptly, grabbing her jacket. "Greg," she said, her voice shaking, "we're going back to the chapel right now." But when they reached St. Jude's, the chapel wasn't empty anymore. The chain on the front door was gone, and through the cracked wood, a light flickered from inside, the same cold blue glow as a police evidence lamp. Someone had beaten them there.
Rain pounded the cracked stained glass as detectives Finch and Torres approached the entrance of St. Jude's Chapel. The wind howled through the trees, scattering leaves and shards of glass across the gravel path. The faint blue glow from inside pulsed like a heartbeat through the gaps in the warped wooden door. Finch gripped her flashlight. "We go in quiet," she murmured. Torres nodded. He raised his gun, nudged the door open, and the smell of wet earth and old incense rolled out, a mixture of decay and sanctity that turned the air heavy. The blue light came from an evidence lantern, the kind used by police, but it wasn't theirs. Someone had set it deliberately on the pulpit, illuminating a single object laid out beneath it. A photograph. Finch moved closer. The photo showed the Roberts family, smiling, relaxed, sitting at a picnic table in daylight. Across the top, written in thick black ink, "The Last Supper." Torres exhaled. "Jesus, this is staged." Finch scanned the corners of the chapel. "Not just staged. Someone wants us to see this." At that moment, the faint hum returned, low, rhythmic, almost melodic. It came from beneath them. Torres frowned. "You hear that?" Finch knelt, pressing her ear to the floorboards. The hum wasn't mechanical. It was voices, distorted and distant, like a group chanting underground. "There's something below us," she said. They found a door behind the pulpit, half buried in the wall's shadow. The hinges were old but freshly oiled. Finch eased it open, and a staircase descended into blackness. The smell intensified, damp stone and mold. They followed the sound downward. At the bottom, the narrow corridor opened into a crypt. Dozens of candles flickered, their wax melted into long, dripping stalactites. Religious paintings, torn and water-stained, leaned against the walls. In the center of the room was a wooden table covered in dust and something laid out on top. 4 plates. 4 wine glasses. Finch froze. It's the Roberts' dinner table. The same plates, the same utensils, the same setup, perfectly recreated down to the folded napkins. A single fork was missing again. Torres shined his light across the crypt. Symbols were carved into the walls, circles enclosing crosses, numbers, and Latin phrases, some fresh, some faded. One phrase repeated several times, "Redime per convivium." Finch translated aloud, "Redeemed through the feast." Torres shook his head. What the hell does that mean? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the lab. She opened it and her stomach dropped. Results: DNA on lipstick napkin. Match confirmed. Grace Doran. Finch's pulse quickened. Grace Doran, the Roberts' neighbor's daughter, early 20s. She'd moved away years ago after a breakdown, living off-grid, according to her mother. "Grace," said Torres, reading over her shoulder. "She's connected to this?" Finch looked at the dinner table again. "She's the missing 4th fork." They drove back to Hollow Creek, the rain now a downpour. The Doran house was quiet, its windows glowing faintly behind curtains. Finch and Torres stepped onto the porch. Before knocking, Finch noticed something, a faint light flickering through the basement window. She drew her gun and whispered, "Basement, now." They circled around and pried open the storm doors. The hinges creaked, revealing a narrow staircase lined with boxes. The basement smelled of mildew and candle wax. Grace Doran sat in the center of the room, cross-legged, surrounded by candles. Her long, pale hair hung over her face. She wore a choir robe, the same style worn at St. Jude's before it closed. On the concrete floor before her was a single dinner plate, empty except for a folded photo of the Roberts family. When she spoke, her voice was soft, detached, as if she were remembering a dream. They finally finished the meal. Finch kept her gun steady. "Grace, we're here to help. Where are the Roberts?" She tilted her head. "Gone. Like they wanted." Torres took a step forward. "Gone where?" She looked up. Her eyes were red, hollow. "They were chosen. Father said it was time to feed the faithful." Finch's throat tightened. "Father who? Collins? He's dead." "No, the other one." She reached behind her and placed something on the floor. A cassette recorder, old and cracked. She pressed play. A man's voice filled the room, distorted by static, but unmistakably calm and commanding. "The meal must not be interrupted. The body is the vessel. The feast brings them home." The voice continued, whispering verses in Latin, each line punctuated by a faint metallic scraping, the same sound from the Roberts video. Finch felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Who is that?" Grace whispered, "He calls himself Father Abel. He took them to finish what we started." Hours later, Finch sat in the station listening to the tape again. She'd sent Torres to run checks on any clergy with that name. None came up.
but something about the voice was familiar, too calm, too practiced. She pulled the Roberts case files back up on her screen, reviewing witness statements. One detail she'd overlooked from Evelyn's sister's interview caught her eye. John mentioned meeting a new pastor before the kid's confirmation, said he was helping him find his faith again. She searched church archives. The only new clergy in town that year was a temporary volunteer who filled in during Father Collins' health leave. His name, Abel Raines. No forwarding address, no record after 2008. But the deeper she dug, the stranger it got. Raines's personnel file from the diocese had been sealed. Court order. When she called the diocesan office, the secretary hesitated before answering. "Detective, that name shouldn't exist. We were told never to speak of him again." "Why?" Finch demanded. "Because Father Raines wasn't a priest. He was an investigator." Finch blinked. "Investigator?" "Yes, hired by the diocese after the St. Jude's fire. His job was to find out if the chapel had been used for unsanctioned ceremonies." "What happened to him?" "He disappeared." That night, Finch couldn't sleep. She played the recording again, isolating background sounds. A faint echo stood out. Dripping water, the rumble of passing trains. She cross-referenced local tunnels and found one under Old Mill Road, less than 2 miles from the Roberts home. By dawn, she and Torres were standing before its entrance, an abandoned railway tunnel sealed off decades ago after a collapse. Someone had pried the middle gate open recently. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the damp air. The tunnel walls were coated in grime and moss. As they moved deeper, they began seeing signs, discarded candles, wax drippings, and faint chalk symbols identical to those in the chapel. The air grew colder. Then Finch saw it. At the tunnel's end, a faint flicker of light. They crept closer. A makeshift altar sat beneath the arch, surrounded by candles. Behind it, a man in a black coat knelt, whispering softly. His voice echoed, calm, deliberate. The same tone from the recording. Finch said her voice steadily, "Father Abel." He didn't turn around. "Detective Finch," he replied as though expecting her. She froze. "Where are the Roberts?" He stood slowly, turning toward her. His face was calm, almost serene. "They've been redeemed. They wanted release, and I gave them their release." Torres raised his gun. "Where are they?" Abel smiled faintly. "You're standing where they rest." Finch's flashlight dropped toward the ground. The floor wasn't stone. It was soil, loosened, recently disturbed. Fresh. Before she could speak, Abel lifted something from the altar, a photograph, half-burned, of the Roberts family. He said softly, "They weren't the first, and they won't be the last." He blew out the candles. The tunnel plunged into darkness.
The instant Father Abel blew out the candles, the world collapsed into darkness. Finch's flashlight flickered wildly as the sound of boots scuffed across wet soil. Torres shouted for her to move, his light slicing through smoke and dust. But Abel was gone. Only the faint echo of his voice lingered in the tunnel. "Faith demands a price, detective." They scrambled toward the exit, coughing through the thick, damp air. When they emerged into the early dawn light, Abel's footprints vanished into the overgrown field. Backup arrived 10 minutes later, but the tunnel behind them had already caved in. It was as if it had swallowed itself. Forensics teams dug for hours. They recovered the Roberts' belongings, phones, jewelry, Evelyn's teaching ID, but no bodies. The official report listed them as presumed dead, but Finch knew that wasn't closure. That was erasure.
3 days later, she sat alone in her office, looping the tunnel audio. The hum she'd heard before, the hymn, was there again. But when she filtered out the echo, something new appeared beneath it. A second layer. Whispered words. Coordinates. She traced them to an isolated property 15 miles outside town, a condemned farmhouse once owned by the diocese as a retreat center. Now it was boarded up, covered in ivy, marked no trespassing. Finch didn't call for backup. She didn't want anyone else caught in the shadows of this case. The house loomed pale under a washed-out sky. She pushed the door open, her gun raised, flashlight slicing through floating dust. The air smelled like rain and rot. The walls were stripped bare except for the kitchen. There, on a wooden table, sat a tape recorder already running. She stepped closer. Static hissed. Then a voice, Abel's, calm as a confession. "If you're listening, detective, then you followed the trail. You understand now that faith is not what we were told. The Roberts saw that truth. They're free because they believed." Finch's pulse spiked. She scanned the room. A door stood slightly ajar at the back. The floorboards creaked under her boots. When she pushed it open, her flashlight beam fell on something that made her breath catch. The Roberts family portraits, dozens of them, covered the wall. Smiling faces from school events, Christmas cards, baseball games, but every one had been marked with small circles drawn over their eyes in red ink. Pinned beside them were other faces, dozens more, families, children, couples, all from Hollow Creek and nearby towns. People who had vanished over the last decade, cases unsolved, forgotten. At the bottom corner of the collage was a single blank frame. Her name written beneath it. Detective Laura Finch. She stumbled back, heart hammering. Behind her the tape clicked again. "You've always been part of this, Laura. You were chosen the moment you opened the floor at St. Matthew's." The room seemed to close in. She spun toward the hall and froze. Standing there, illuminated by pale daylight, was Grace Doran. Her choir robe was gone. She wore plain clothes now, her hands trembling. "He said you'd come. He said you'd finish what he couldn't." Finch steadied her aim. "Grace, listen to me. Abel's manipulating you. He killed those people." "No, he showed them mercy. He said the ones who eat in darkness never hunger again." "Where is he now?" Grace's eyes darted toward the floor. "He's been here the whole time." Before Finch could react, the floor beneath her cracked. The rotten boards gave way and she crashed into a pit below, a cellar. The flashlight clattered beside her, spinning light across the dirt. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then a soft scraping echoed in the dark. Abel stepped forward from the shadows, his coat torn, face streaked with dirt but calm. "Welcome, detective." He looked almost reverent. "You've seen the corruption. You know what they did in those churches, the greed, the silence. I gave them something pure, a final supper without lies. You murdered them. I redeemed them." He knelt near the wall and brushed away soil, revealing a line of carved crosses. Hundreds of them, etched by hand. Each one found peace. Each one fed the light. Finch's hand found her gun, but Abel raised a hand slowly. "Before you shoot, there's something you should know." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. "Your mother's name was Evelyn Cooper, yes? Music teacher, choir director at St. Jude's before it burned?" Finch froze. He smiled softly. She wasn't just a teacher. She was one of us. She helped start it. She was supposed to lead the first feast until she ran. She thought changing her name would hide you, but you were born in faith. You came back to finish her work. For the first time in her career, her hand trembled. You're lying! He stepped closer, holding out the letter. Read it. She snatched it from him, unfolding the yellowed paper. Her mother's handwriting, unmistakable. The ink faded, but the words were clear. If they find me, they'll take her. She's the last one who carries the song. Her vision blurred. Abel's voice softened. You see now, you didn't find the Roberts. You replaced them. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small cassette labeled The Feast of Hollow Creek. He pressed play. The same humming filled the air, but this time it wasn't random. It was layered, organized, harmonized. The same melody from the Roberts video, the same one from the chapel. Her mother's voice joined the others. Her breath hitched. Where did you get this? Abel smiled. She recorded it the night she died. She believed even as the flames took the walls. You carry that belief, detective. You just forgot. Something inside Finch broke. Fury or grief, she couldn't tell. She lunged forward, grabbing the gun with both hands. You think I'm part of this? I'm ending it! Abel's calm expression cracked for the first time. You can't end faith. You can only feed it. A sound echoed above. Sirens. Torres's voice shouted her name. Abel stepped back, arms raised. Looks like your flock found you. He smiled once more, then whispered, Redeemer per convivium. He struck a match. The entire cellar ignited, not in flame, but light. Phosphorus powder laid in lines along the floor, blazed white as fire. Finch dove backward, shielding her face. Abel's silhouette stood amid the light, arms outstretched like a figure at the altar, until the ceiling gave in. Torres pulled her out moments before the house collapsed. Weeks later, investigators scoured the wreckage. No trace of Abel Raines was found. The Roberts bodies were eventually discovered beneath the tunnel rubble, seated around a table carved into stone, plates before them, hands folded in prayer. The file was closed. Official cause: ritual homicide. Case status: deceased suspect. But Finch couldn't let it go. Late one night, she sat in her apartment, listening again to the tape labeled The Feast of Hollow Creek. At the 30-second mark, a new sound appeared, faint but undeniable. A woman's voice whispering directly into the mic. Laura, it's time to remember. She stared out her window toward the burned silhouette of St. Jude's on the horizon. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she was chasing the darkness or if it had been chasing her all along. She opened her laptop and began typing a new case file. Subject: Abel Raines. Status: unknown. Note: the feast continues. Then she looked into the camera and said softly, If you think this story ended here, you haven't heard the next hymn. Subscribe, because this isn't over.